Okay, we took a look at HTML. Now we're going to take a look at CSS. What I've done is I've set up a simple HTML document here over on the left, and on the right we have the preview pane for brackets. For those of you who don't know the preview pane can be accessed anytime you click this lightning bolt here. It'll open up your default browser, and then you can actually do live preview of anything you're working with. So if I take this out, you'll see it updated over on the right. Not bad, huh? So what I've done is I've laid out a simple HTML page. We have our body element, then we have our div tag. Within that, there's a header tag, and then we have an H1 and H2, which is a headline and a subhead. Then we have another div tag, and then within that we created a section tag, and then within that we put another div, and then we have our content. Then we see another div tag, and within that we have an image. What I want you to look at first is a browser is going to naturally let everything flow top to bottom if there's no styles given. Keep that in mind when you're styling and you see something placed in an odd position. If it's placed from top to bottom, you know that no styles are being applied to it. And that's essentially what's happening right now. The only styles that are happening are coming from the browser itself. No other styles are being applied. So all of the, oh, excuse me, I take that back. We are using normalize. Because we're using normalize, we're actually resetting style sheets so that they work within all browsers. So forget what I just said. There are some styles that are being applied to reset elements, but we don't have any actual layout styles applied or design style elements attached. And that's what we're going to do. So first thing I want to do is I want to get all this content here centered within the header. So I'm going to go to my CSS, and this is actually all reset as well. So let's take this out so again we're not confused. Sorry, I should have done this before. All right, now we should be back to where we were. Now we have no style sheets applied. So if we go back to our index, we have an element here or a tag for a header. I want everything that's within this tag to be centered. To do that, I got to write a style sheet. First, I'm going to identify what the style sheet is going to be applied to, the header tag, and then I'm going to declare that the text align be centered. Just like that, we have all of our text centered, but only within the header tag. Next, I want hello world to be all uppercase. So to do that, I'm going to declare my H1 oh, wrong one, sorry. To be all uppercase. Whenever you're writing style sheets, you're going to follow this general format. You're going to identify what the style sheet needs to be applied to. You have to have an opening bracket and a closing bracket, and between that will be your style sheets. You can have multiple style sheets within a style. So I could say text transform uppercase. I could also say the color of the text is going to be blue. That doesn't show up very well. Let's say it's going to be red. Or let's get even more crazy and put in a hexadecimal number of that doesn't give me anything. It does that. Oh, because I'm starting with. There we go, maroon. It may still not show up as well. So that's how we're going to be using style sheets from here on out. What I want to take note of is there is a way to apply style sheets directly in your HTML. We call that inline styles. So I could come here. Oh, let's use it on this paragraph tag, and let's do style. Let's make it all bold. So we'll go to font, weight, bold, and it changes everything over here to bold. Inline style sheets are okay, but they're poorly used because if we have a style sheet written here for the P tag, I have this style, but because I have an inline style, it's overriding whatever my style is here. So we don't like to use inline styles for that purpose. Let me give you another example because that's probably not a good one. Let's change this to line height. And we'll say it's going to be 32 pixels. All right, see how the line height has changed on all of my paragraph tags? If I come back over here and I change this to line height 21 pixels, it overrides my style sheet. I don't want you to get in the habit of doing that. So if you use inline styles, you will be deducted points for that. All of your style sheets should be within an external style sheet folder, and I'll explain how to do that. Now let's get back to styling. All right. These are some simple styles, like we put some line height here, we changed the color, we made it all uppercase, but we still aren't actually playing around with the actual layout of the page. What I want to do is I want to add some padding, and I want to bring this image over here to the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to style this section. First thing I'm going to do is add my padding. So let's go to section, and I'm going to do a padding left of 10 pixels. Let's do a little bit more, 20 pixels. And a padding right, 20 pixels. So now I have padding on the left and on the right. If you see, I've put two divs. Within that div, I have my content. And within the other div, I have my image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these divs to control where the text is on the left and where the image is on the right. To do that, I'm going to actually declare a class. To declare a class, you add a class attribute to the element that you want it to apply to. And for this one, I'm going to say left. And for this one, I'm going to say right. Then I'm going to come in here, and I can't just say left and right like I have with the elements, because when you define a class, you have to have a prefix applied to it. Now I can style it because I have this prefix here. So with left, I'm going to do something called float left. And then with the right, I'm going to do something called float right. Well, something's happened. We definitely have our image floating to the right, but we don't really see anything happening with the text. What going on right here is this is actually floating left. We can't just visually see it because the text is taking up 100% of the area. We know that the image is floating right because the image itself isn't large enough to take up 100% of the area. If we were to resize our screen, there's no way we can tell that either of them are floating left or right. So to get these to float consistently to the left and to the right, what I'm going to do is change the width of each section or element. So I'm going to take this width and set it to 400 pixels. And instantly it's moved in a line with the image so that the text is to the left and the image is to the right. I can come here and go ahead and define a width to the image as well, but it's going to look a little wonky. And our page has to scroll to the right. That's because that this image has not been declared a width. We have declared a width to this container, but we've not declared a width to this image, so the image naturally wants to fulfill its actual size. To get around that, we can actually tell all images to have a width of 100%, and that means it'll have a width of 100% of whatever its outer container is. And for this case, the outer container for that image is 300 pixels wide. If we change this to 400 pixels, the image will get bigger. 200 pixels, it gets smaller, and so on and so on. What happens if we resize our screen? If we resize our screen, we lose the alignment. That's because we're declaring an absolute width of 400 on the left and an absolute width of 600 on the right. And not all screens are going to accommodate that. To fix that, we think responsively. And the best way to think responsively is to start thinking in percentages. So I'm going to go back and do the exact same thing that we just did, and instead of using absolutes, which are pixels, we're going to use percentages. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare this section to have 1% margin on the left and the right. And that means it's going to be 1% of the overall browser. Then I'm going to take the left and the right and give them a percentage minus what I'm already using. So if I've already used 1% on the left and 1% on the right, I've used 2% of the overall width, which leaves me with 98%. So on the left, I will put 58%. On the right, I will put 40%. Now I should be able to resize my screen, and both elements will stay within the percentage that they've been given, like that. So now it doesn't matter what we do. What's on the right will always accommodate 40%, and what's on the left will always accommodate 58%, and our margins will our paddings on the left and right will always be 1% of the browser size. This is what's called responsive design or mobile first design, because we are wanting to look into how does this look on all screens. We can go a little bit further and play around with this. Let's save this. And let's go ahead and put another section below here. So I'm just going to copy what we already have. And I'm going to add, oops, 3 columns. Now, in order to do this, I want to create a new class called 1/3. And I'm going to apply that class to all 3 of these divs at the bottom. Now nothing's happening. They're taking their full form at this point, but I have 3 containers. What I want to do is I want to apply a style sheet so that all 3 of these containers are 1/3 of their area. To do that, I simply write a style for 1/3 so that the width is 33%. Now, what's happened? The width is 33%, but they're not within 1 row of each other because I haven't told it to float left. And so in order to align these left to right, we're missing our float. So once we add a float, let me update the screen here. We should see our object float left to right. The problem is that when you float left to right, any previous container, if it's not filling in this area, it's going to float to accommodate it. Floats want to naturally float into empty space. So because this space is not empty, it's actually the first one is floating over into this area. To correct this, we need to look at how our setup is, and our sections are actually not accommodating the entire space. So to do that, we simply update the sections so that they too float. And then we have 2 distinct sections, a top one with a left div and a right div, and then we have a bottom section with 3 equally spaced columns in 1 row. So we'll continue to advance on this in our next lesson, talking about how to pull in external files and how to work with scripts.